It is July 8th, 2025, and Trump and Netanyahu wrapped up their fancy White House dinner where Trump told the reporters that he believes that the war with Iran is pretty much over, but that the U.S. is prepared to attack again if needed. So the question then becomes, because we all know that the U.S. and Israel's war on Iran is not over, so what is Iran doing to prepare for the next attack? And as we all saw, the Iranian president spoke out in a recent interview with Tucker Carlson, where he advocated for diplomacy. But what did he leave out of that interview? And what should he have told the world about not only Iran's response, but also the legitimacy of its civilian nuclear program and where it stands when it comes to the ongoing pressure from the US? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Ehsan Safarnejad, an Iran-based geopolitical analyst and host of Political Aficionado. Ehsan, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to your show.
Always good to get to talk to you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as I know that Trump and Netanyahu had dinner in the White House on Monday, and Trump told reporters that he believes the war with Iran is over, but that the U.S. is still, quote, ready, willing, and able to attack. Now, I'm sure that a good portion of the talks that were had between Trump and Netanyahu revolved around their ongoing genocide against the Palestinians. But at the same time, we also have to remember that tensions with Iran are still a factor here. I think you would have to be extremely naive to think that they are not planning another attack against Iran. So, do you think that the Iranian government is aware and preparing for that next attack?
When I talk to average Joe on the street, it seems that all of them, almost all of them, are very much cognizant of the fact that the war is not over. Right? That's the consensus inside Iran. But I'm not actually sure about the government. And when I say government, let me be a little bit more specific. I mean the executive branch. WhatsApp was used and is being used in order to spy on individuals. I'm not saying that, it was the main reason behind, the assassination of top Iranian military commanders, because they weren't actually using WhatsApp. Some of them weren't even using their phones, right? They had people sort of taking their messages. But when you're a security analyst, when you want to advise the policymakers or the politicians in order to adopt a policy, you want to close down all these backdoors or possible points of intelligence breach as much as possible. But what the Iranian politicians, what the executive branch of the government actually did was, as soon as the war, quote unquote, ended, they started, removing the restrictions on WhatsApp. And I know that, the Americans usually tend to, have very closed guards in response to, people advocating for restrictions on certain platforms. Obviously, freedom of speech is a big thing in United States and other civil rights. But considering the fact that a one-time attack by a non-state actor resulted in United States government passing Patriot Act, which is one of the most draconian pieces of legislation that I've ever seen in my entire life. Section 215 allows the authorities to have access to business records without probable cause. I mean, I can keep going about how draconian Patriot Act is, but just I think that it suffices to mention that as an example, that if someone thinks that, the fact that an Iranian after a 12-day war is concerned about Meta hiring, a lot of IDF soldiers, the head of the censor for Palestine, Israel, case on Meta is actually a former advisor of Netanyahu. So if you're concerned about that an Iranian, after 12 days of war against two nuclear armed powers, is advocating for temporary restrictions of WhatsApp, and then you're fine with a one-time attack by a non-state actor resulting in Patriot Act, you should understand that you're a freaking hypocrite. But putting that aside, despite the fact that the executive branch is not doing a very good job preparing for the next episode of war, the legislative branch has actually taken appropriate actions in order to prevent some of the security breaches that we saw previously. They have passed two legislations. One of them is about the sort of regulating the micro-aerial vehicles, micro-drones, in which anyone who wants to use the drones or micro-aerial vehicles, they have to go to the police and get a license. Similar to the driving license, you have to have a drone license. And another one is, regulating Starlink as well. If you want to use a Starlink communication, you also have to have a permit. And maybe I should explain why these two things are such big deals. As I mentioned on my previous appearance on your show, these two methods or tools were used by Mossad colluders inside Iran to basically put a very much big strain on the Iranian air defense systems. Starlink was used in order to remotely control these anti-tank missiles. So a lot of times people talk about the Israeli air superiority, and it goes to an absurd length to which people think that the Israeli Air Force is sort of mysterious and it can do whatever it wants. But the truth is that many of the Iranian air defense systems were taken out by anti-tank missiles. And these anti-tank missiles were controlled through a Starlink remotely. The second thing was the launch of these small micro-aerial vehicles, small drones. And they used this fact that radars have blind spots, and if you have a flying object that is flying at a very low altitude, they are basically using that weakness of the air defense systems in order to inflict damage on them. So these two legislations are very important, and I can say that they are very good initiatives that are taken by the legislative branch. Another very good policy that is being implemented is the deportation of the illegal immigrants. Unfortunately, not many of the illegal members, but I should say that many of the attacks that were carried, the illegal immigrants had a very unfortunate role to play in those attacks. And, considering that the Iranian government is deporting them, which is, based on their statement, it's a temporary deportation, despite the fact that many of them were, as I mentioned, illegally here. We hope that they would return to the country, but so far as the situation that demands inside Iran, as the threat of war persists, unfortunately, Iran has no way of, basically neither protecting them, nor protecting its own sovereignty, or, finding ways in order to sort of thwart the attacks that might be done by the undocumented immigrants that are here. So far, the policy has been to deport these individuals out of the country. And I would say that these three initiatives are good starting point for preparing for an attack that might be upcoming from either United States or the Israeli side.
Yeah, and I appreciate the explanation there and kind of separating the different branches of government. And it was Also interesting because I saw some of those reports in the Western media talking about, Iran deporting illegal migrants and making it sound as if it was so inhumane to do so. But while the US talks a lot about national security, Iran is having to really face that head on, what national security truly looks like in their country, as they have been the ones openly attacked. And I thought it was interesting because Iranian President Pezeshkian recently had an interview with American journalist Tucker Carlson, and he said that Iran is open to resuming nuclear talks with the US, and he believes that Tehran and Washington can work out their differences through diplomacy. So, how do you think that the Iranian people perceived this interview and the fact that the president was willing to have this conversation with Tucker Carlson?
Well, many of the Iranians actually feel that it was extremely humiliating. He didn't mention the role that United States played in attacking Iran, because United States actually attacked Iran in Operation Midnight Hammer. He didn't mention that. He didn't really use any legal justification in order to advocate for the Iranian rights to have a nuclear enrichment program, which is a given right under Article 4 of the NPT. So a lot of Iranians are actually very, very angry. I mean, they feel humiliated, and they think that a country with such a rich and ancient history shouldn't have to resort into these, I don't know, excuses, what people want to call it. I don't know what to call the statements made by Pezeshkian. But I know that many Iranians are very angry with those statements. The way that I see it, there could have been three objectives that the Iranian president could have gone for uh, in that interview, which unfortunately I don't see him doing that. He could, as I mentioned, explain the legal justifications of the Iranian demand to have a nuclear enrichment program within the territories of Iran. Um, that didn't happen. He didn't mention anything. He didn't mention that under Article, for example, 51, we have the right to self-defense. And just to be clear, I'm basically blaming the people who prepared him for that interview, because, I mean, let's be honest, every president has a speechwriter, people who console him on how to engage with media, and I think that they did a very poor job of, uh, you know, sort of briefing him about the legal justifications from different aspects. The fact that our sovereignty was violated by Israel and United States. He didn't mention any of those things. So very poor job on that front. Second thing that he could have done, I mean, he wanted to do, uh, was to basically create a sort of gap between U.S. president and Netanyahu. Now, I have my own sort of opinion on that, but as it stands, when we see Prime Minister, war criminal Prime Minister of Israel, giving a letter to Donald Trump at a dinner table about him nominating Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, it is very hard for me to imagine that that kind of sort of mind trick would work on him. And that's aside from, the fact that Trump has 100 million reasons given to him by Miriam Adelson as the motivation to not really side with the Iranians here. So the second playbook that he could have used, which doesn't really work, he went for that. The third was to sort of talk to the American population and try to sort of appeal to the MAGA base, people who are anti-intervention. They are America first, and they want to see their country spending its resources for the sake of the Americans, for their prosperity. the way that I saw it, he did a very poor job on that front as well. Their their cronies, the cronies of the reformist government online, they try their very best in order to make it sound as he did a good job. I'm not buying it. I have friends who are MAGA. Uh, they're they're very staunch supporters of Donald Trump, and I have been able to talk to them on all these three levels. But I don't think that the Iranian president did what it was needed to be done. And in fact, you don't really even have to listen to me. Just go and compare the way that he talked to Tucker Carlson and the interview that he did with Ted Cruz and the interview that he did with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Both of those interviews were much more interesting. Tucker Carlson, I mean, I would have Tucker Carlson as the person who advocates for my rights rather than the Iranian president. He did that much of a poor job. Uh, I, for one, am not pleased with that with the approach that he took. He went for the low-hanging fruit, and then and he even failed at doing that. So, and from my understanding, a big portion of the Iranian population is also very angry about the humiliation, the fact that, for example, the Iranian president said that we could easily reach a deal with United States, despite the fact that United States, was preparing for this for 15 years. That's not me saying that. That's Chief of Joint Staff General Daniel Kane, who said that the Operation Midnight Hammer was the culmination of 15 years of preparation by United States military. So, factual point from the standpoint of being an educative interview, it failed. From the fact of providing legal precedents, legal justifications, it failed. From the point of view of talking to the MAGA, I think that if you compare that to Marjorie Taylor Greene's interview with the interview of Tucker Carlson with Ted Cruz, even the videos of David Smith, who's a comedian, that comedian did a better job than my president.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of laying out what he could have done, right? Because anyone can criticize it and say, "Oh, well, that wasn't a great interview," or "Oh, he made these points." But it really makes you think when you're putting it out there and saying, "Okay, here are the different ways that he could have appealed to the public." Because obviously, if any foreign leader is doing an interview with Tucker Carlson, that's not to speak to the people of their country. That's to kind of speak to the Western world, right? And to give them insight into here is why we're doing what we're doing. Here is more than you're going to see anywhere else in the Western media. And, the point that you made there about him kind of presenting Netanyahu and Israel as the bad guys, right? They're standing in the way of what would otherwise be complete peace between Iran and the US, while at the same time, the US has been openly preparing for war with Iran for decades now. And if it was just Netanyahu, if he was the only one that wanted to attack Iran, I don't think that the US would just magically jump on board with that, right? If they looked at this and said, hey, this is going to be bad for us, then they're not going to go along with something just because Israel wants them to do it. So, in agreeing to do this interview in the first place, how do you interpret that and then kind of this strategy of, oh, we're going to appeal to Trump by, convincing him that it's just Israel that is the only thing standing in between us and peace with the country that's actively preparing for war with Iran?
Well, it's funny because many times when we talk to the Western media, they accuse Iranians of having a theocratic government. I mean, it's true, Iran is a theocratic democracy. It's not a purely theocratic country. It's not a completely democratic country, as are not the Western countries. They have their own interpretation of democracy, which is liberal democracy, which means that, I mean, if people want to infringe upon the rights of the minorities, if the majority of the people want to do that, because the underlying principles of the Western democracies prohibit that, the over the democracy is then overruled by these principles that the people of the West have agreed upon, at least initially, right? So that's something. But the reason that I brought it up is that many times, again, as I mentioned, Iran is being depicted as this totalitarian theocracy. But then when I listen to the politicians from United States and West in general, I got to say I have a very tough time of understanding how you guys are not living under theocratic governments as well. For example, in the latest interview of Ted Cruz with Tucker Carlson, which I mentioned, uh, Ted Cruz mentioned that how he was raised as a Catholic, I think, and uh, you know, he read in the Bible that those who bless Israel are the blessed people, whatever. But like, that's not the point. I don't remember the exact words that he used. But the point is that his motivation comes from a religious upbringing, which sounds pretty much theocratic to me. I mean, I oftentimes like to play this game with people in the West, and I mean, I call it "Who said it?" The Iranian president or the U.S. president. And I mean, there's a statement that says the the speaker said, God told me to go and fight these terrorists. Who said it? Was it Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, or was it, for example, George Bush, who said, God told me, George, go and fight those terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan? That was George W. Bush. So it sounds pretty freaking theocratic to me. But I mean, that's another point. What you mentioned about this chasm that the Iranian president wants to create between Trump and Netanyahu, he truly, unfortunately, believes it. There are people who inhale too much copium fluid, and they think that they want to say that the Iranian president is playing this 52-dimensional chess game. But the truth is that no, that's not the case. He truly believes this. And it's very easy to bash on, the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. But again, as I mentioned, all these presidents, politicians, they have people who write their speeches for them. And when you go and see the track records or the beliefs of the advisors of those individuals, that actually gives you a better point or better understanding of how you can analyze their behavior. 180 university professors wrote a letter to the Iranian president saying that we need a radical shift in the paradigm of governance inside Iran. That letter is everything that I would write, almost word for word, if a foreign intelligence community asked me to write a paper about how they can overthrow the Iranian government. That's how bad it is. I'll go through the provisions so that people know that this is just not just a smear. For example, they advocate for the release of prisoners. When have I ever heard that? Right before the overthrow of the Afghan government in Afghanistan, when Talib fighters were released from the prison before United States leaving the country. I'm not telling the Afghans how to run their country, but it is true that Taliban was an opposition. Whether you think it was legitimate or illegitimate, I'm not in a position to talk about that. But the point is that that move in releasing the Talib fighters from the prisons had a very major role in, the toppling of the Afghan government. You can also see it in, Syria, when Bashar al-Assad released 7,500 prisoners, 6% of the total prison population of Syria. That's a very high number, considering the fact that Syria has thieves, right? So a lot of people were in prison for good reasons, and still 6% of the total number of the prison population were released by Bashar al-Assad. So that's something that is done every time that you want to topple a government. I've seen it too many times. The second thing that they advocated was the diminishing the power of the IRGC. Anyone who knows anything about the Iranian armed forces know that the biggest role played by any forces inside Iran in retaliating against Israel and United States hostility and aggression towards Iran was carried out by the Iranian IRGC aerospace force. And if you say that you want to diminish the powers of the IRGC or the armed forces in general during such sensitive times, that to me is a very bad sign. The third thing that they mentioned was to adopt a more liberal market. While I'm not opposed to that, I'm not against free market. Let that be known to everyone who wants to create some sort of false dichotomy that this person is against free market. But it's the truth that any country that is the target of hostility by another country sooner or later has to think about some individuals hoarding basic necessities of the general population for their own gain. That's something that you have to address. So in that sense, you need more scrutiny of the markets. I went to the supermarket just the other day, and the vendor told me that they don't have the cooking oil that is produced inside Iran. Some people are hoarding it. He has reported it to the government. They have yet to do anything substantial to address that. And the fourth thing that they mentioned in their letter to the Iranian president was engage in diplomacy, which is basically the root of your question. Now I'm getting to the root of your question. To engage in diplomacy with United States in order to prevent a war. First of all, we were supposed to negotiate with United States in Oman on 16th of July, June, 3 days after we were attacked. I mean, 3 days before the scheduled meeting between Iranian and American politicians, we were attacked by Israel. So it's not a radical shift in the paradigm of governance of Iran. That's what we have been doing. That's not a radical shift. And by the way, that didn't protect us, did it? So, but despite everything, you see these individuals still promoting these failed policy. I mean, it reminds you of that famous quote that the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over and over again, expecting the result to change. It's not going to change, but you see the Iranian reformist camp and the advisors of the Iranian president to actually, advocate for that. One of the people who signed that letter was Abdul Tabrizi, just in order to prevent the people who come here and they are bad faith actors and they want to say, well, who cares about 180 university professors writing such letter? One of them was Abdul Tabrizi, the person who stood right to the Iranian president in the presidential debates about the economy. I mean, it's a freaking huge and influential person, and he has that kind of reasoning. So people oftentimes say that it's just a rhetoric. What do you expect? Did you expect him to go and declare war? Against the fallacy of false dilemma, right? There is not just two options that you have. You have multiple options. You could have also, talk about how, we were wronged, and also at the same time say that we are not going to shut down the doors on diplomacy. But the point here is that, unfortunately, it's not just the rhetoric. The Iranian president truly, unequivocally, without any doubt, undoubtedly, believes that negotiation is going to save Iran, which I think that it's a death sentence for Iran. If someone truly is so naive as to believe that negotiation is going to protect the territorial integrities of Iran, he's delusional.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. And I think that, it's also important to take into account the fact that exactly as you were pointing out there, the US has literally planned for this exact scenario, right? I mean, I go back to the Brookings Institute report from 2009 a lot of times, but in their policy paper, they literally plan out 9 different options for ways that the US can quote unquote deal with Iran. And one of them is luring Iran into talks, convincing them that, oh, hey, we want some kind of a deal, and then using that as a way to attack them, which is exactly what they did. So there's no world in which I think that the US establishment is going to wake up tomorrow and say, oh, hey, Iran wants to talk with us. Okay, yeah, let's forget about all of those plans that we had to destroy their economy and try to pursue regime change and, completely crumble their country as a main pillar of the multipolar world. The one comment I will make about what you were saying about Ted Cruz is that I'm from Texas and he is universally hated here. And so it's kind of funny that to watch him sitting there with Tucker Carlson and he's saying, oh, well, I was taught that those who bless Israel will be blessed and those who curse Israel will be cursed, as if he's talking about and comparing the biblical version of Israel to the literal current genocidal state of Israel. It is funny to watch, but just know that he is well, he's especially hated here in Texas, and yet he keeps getting reelected over and over. But going back to the current situation, because I know this is something that we talked about last time you were on the show, when that was kind of in the immediate aftermath of Iran agreeing to end its retaliatory attacks and essentially agreeing to a ceasefire. And we were kind of watching, saying, okay, how long is this going to last? And I know that, for the Iranian government, by agreeing, hey, we're going to end our retaliation, they're showing, or at least trying to send this message that one, they don't want war, and two, they want to pursue diplomacy. As we've been talking about, we don't think that diplomacy is necessarily going to get them anywhere. But now we're in this position of Iran waiting for the next attack from the US and Israel and choosing how it's going to retaliate. And one thing that stands out to me is the fact that really outside of the axis of resistance, Iran is very similar to Palestine in the sense that it is very much alone, right? No one in the region is going to step in and really take part in standing up to the US and Israel, no one in the international community at this point. So, what kind of a position does that leave Iran in? And given that Iran has shown that it can inflict significant damage in Israel, is there any amount of deterrence that comes into play?
Now, I'm very happy that you actually view those things in that framework through that goggle, because I've been sitting and listening to the so-called geopolitical analysts, and the way that they explain the complex tapestry of the geopolitical development between different countries is much, much, much less sophisticated than the interpersonal relations of high school girls. Like, this is something that has bothered me for a long time. The way that if I want to recap what they say, they say, oh yes, we are going to attack Iran, and Russia and China, since they're such good friends with Iran, they're going to back Iran, and then we will have World War III, and our country will get destroyed, and then possibly nuclear fallout will happen. It's not gonna happen that way. It's much more intricate, and the way that the East, as opposed to West, behaves in escalating is that we have this policy of step-by-step escalation, which means that things are not going to culminate in a matter of second to the peak of hostility. Iran has many plays that it has still not used against Israel due to the fact that it is the general understanding between the Iranian politicians, between the Iranian military commanders, that sooner or later we have to go to great length and we have to face NATO. And that's why, even if it's dangerous to us, even if we are going to suffer losses, we are going to keep some of those plays that we have for that kind of scenario, right? And you're absolutely right. For example, I think yesterday the foreign minister of Russia stated that Russia is ready to provide Iran with the enriched uranium it needs for a civilian use. Well, that basically, in the current juncture in time, means that when United States president says that if Iranians decide to enrich uranium again, we are going to bomb it. Basically, that means that, okay, we are kind of on board with that, with the fact that Iran is going to be removed. I mean, this right of Iran for enrichment is going to be taken away from it. Uh, that's what that statement is being interpreted in Iran. And again, as you mentioned, I can't emphasize this enough, that Iran, yes, it is truly alone. But the good news is that we have gotten used to being alone. Iran has prepared plans for that kind of scenario. Mistakes were made during this sort of war between Iran and Israel, this 12 days of defense against Israel. And the reason that people like me are so vocal in criticizing the Iranian government is not due to the fact that we support United States or the Zionist regime. No, it's in order to bring awareness to people that this is not the strength of the Iranian government. We can do much more. We can escalate much more. Iran can use many of its tools which it has at its disposal, which still it hasn't decided to use yet. Once you understand that kind of justification, not that justification, that kind of line of thinking that the Iranian politicians have, you will understand that we are not going to see an end of the time kind of scenario for Iran. And just one other thing that I think is very important to mention, which I haven't seen many people mention it in the either mainstream media or the alternative media, is the fact that the war against Iran will most likely have to do a lot with the recent developments in Iraq. So I suggest that if people want to know what will happen to Iran, the kind of war that will be waged on Iran in the second phase of the Israeli aggression towards Iran, I would suggest that they have to very carefully follow the developments inside Iraq that are unfolding as we are speaking. It's not going to be exactly the way that the first phase was carried out, right? That's a point of caution. So, because when I talk about, Israelis not really giving up on their aggression towards Iran, many of the people just automatically go into this mode of thinking that, okay, so he's talking about the repetition of the first phase. Not necessarily. I think that it is going to be much more nuanced, and it's going to be different in the way that it is going to be imposed on Iran. But again, the good news is that the military commanders, the IRGC, they are preparing for that scenario. Due to security reasons, I can't really mention them. I mean, not because I know something that is top secret or like on a need to know basis or something like that. No, it's due to the fact that I think that everyone has seen that video of Ryan Grimm speaking about how he reached out to the Pentagon officials, and they said that they used the data gathered by the open source intelligence accounts on Twitter, and that actually helps them to calibrate their attacks on Iran. So, just to make sure, I'm going to refrain from, mentioning anything substantial. But the point is that Iran can escalate. It has a full deck of cards at its disposal that it can use in the upcoming war.
Yeah, and I think that that's good to keep in mind. And also good, exactly as you were pointing out there, people expect that, oh, Israel and the US are going to carry out the same attack again. No, they are looking at a number of different ways, not just to attack Iran, but also to attack them by infiltrating, another version of what they did before. There's a lot that is being planned there that the Iranian government needs to keep in mind, and I'm sure that they are keeping it in mind. But I really appreciate you taking the time to join me and also not only lending insight, but I think some criticism is good sometimes, and reminding people that it doesn't just have to be black and white one way or another. It's good to have legitimate criticism of the messages that are being put out there, and especially at a time like right now where the US and Israel are going to do everything that they can to use it to their advantage to hurt the Iranian people first and foremost. Ehsan Safarnejad, an Iran-based geopolitical analyst and host of Political Aficionado, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for inviting me to your show.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also check out Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.